So, after months of careful deliberation in his lazy boy recliner, Joe Biden made his choice.
Watch it glimmer, see it shimmer, cool and fruity, Jell-O brand gelatin.
Yes, he would have Jell-O for dessert instead of tapioca pudding. It was a tough call. He likes the lumpiness of the tapioca. Plus, he still needed somebody to mash his peas. Meanwhile, in another room, the caregivers made this lady his VP. We went to Liz Warren for comment. Don't worry, Liz. If Joe wins, he'll make you the chief of something. Chief. She definitely has the genes for that. Yeah, Harris got the nod, but not from Joe. Well, he nodded, but he wasn't even in the room. Oh, he was in a room, but not the room. He was tucked away in a subfloor safe house, strapped in a rubber Snuggie, mainlining Ensure. Here's how NPR covered it. Take a look at this picture. Who's bigger? Now look at how The Atlantic covered it. Look at this picture. Who's bigger? What's this tell you when Biden is relegated to a movie poster version of Robin and she's Batman? We know who the top of the ticket really is. I'm looking forward to how the Washington Post covers it. So, does Kamala help the ticket? Of course she does. She's under the age of 90. She doesn't need her food cut up by a day nurse. She knows where she is. But like Joe, she can talk and say almost nothing, and that is a step up. And I think this lady on MSNBC really nails it in a segment we like to call
Stuff my 8-year-old definitely said I swear on a stack of Bibles.
Now check this out.
I like to look at it through the lens of what my daughter, who's 8 years old, when she heard that the vice president had picked Kamala Harris, her eyes got big, Chris, and said, my goodness, she's South Asian and Jamaican. That means anything is possible for a woman. And this is my daughter, who's 8 years old.
Yes, 8 years old. That definitely happened right before the child recited the value of pi to the 100th place. Now, politics is amazing in its ability to turn people into great pals after being bitter enemies. Remember, this was a year ago.
It was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. You also worked with them to oppose busing. And, you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
She also said she believed the women who accused Joe of sexual harassment and other stuff. But my, how that's changed.
My husband Doug and I are so grateful to become a part of your extended family.
I'm sure Dr. Jill is thrilled to have a new relative who thinks her husband's a perv. You know, maybe a reporter with a brain should ask Kamala if she thinks Brett Kavanaugh is still a predator too. Or is she now part of his extended family? I want to know. But you get it. Politicians crave power and will say anything and ruin anyone to get it. Say what you want about Trump, but there's something about him that makes these fakes hate him. It's because he winks at you when he plays their game. He lets you in on it, and that's key. He doesn't pretend he's something he's not, like a moderate for Maoists, which is what the media is already portraying Kamala as.
I thought about the real caricature that Donald Trump is going to try to offer as her, right? Essentially say that she is a black radical who wants to destroy the kind of white American way of life and you know, overrun the suburbs with criminals. That's going to be really hard when you see her there with this sort of winsome appearance. There she is in, you know, sort of a sensible blue suit and pearls and sensible heels.
Holy crap, so all one needs is pearls and sensible heels. Thank God I shop only at Anne Klein. If only there was evidence that she isn't so centric.
I will immediately, by executive action, reinstate DACA status and DACA protection to those young people.
I believe if someone crosses over the border, it is illegal, and you would decriminalize it.
I would not make it a crime punishable by jail. It should be a civil enforcement issue, but not a criminal enforcement issue. That is why I support a Green New Deal. I believe the solution, and I'm actually feel very strongly about this, is that we need to have Medicare for all.
Now, if that's centrist, then Mike Pence is a furry. Speaking of, I hope Mike isn't going to let Joe Biden and Kamala Harris cut America's meat.
We're not going to let Joe Biden and Kamala Harris cut America's meat.
That is reassuring. Thank you, Mike. But it makes you wonder, why is the media now finding moderation appealing after decades of lying about the superiority of left-wing ideas? You helped destroy a country with liberal lunacy, and now you say, hey, you'll like this lady. She's a moderate, not like us dopes. But as the party and media lurches into a dark, dank, bottomless hole of leftism, maybe Kamala actually is a moderate. When your party now condones every sort of criminality in places run by Democrats, Charles Manson would come off like Barry Goldwater. At least Charlie was pro-family, but he also wanted a race war. Does Joe as well?
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. They're going to put you all back in chains.
You got more questions?
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black. That terrible day in Charlottesville, to see those neo-Nazis, close your eyes, and those Klansmen, white supremacists, coming out of fields, carrying lighted torches. At that moment, I knew I couldn't stand by and let Donald Trump, a man who went on to say, when asked about what he thought, he said they were very fine people.
What harmful bullshit. But here's my question. If Joe believes that systemic racism exists, why is he taking up systemic space? Shouldn't he admit his declining white male presence on the top of the ticket proves that systemic racism still exists in the Democrat Party? And then step aside for this woman of color? His systemic presence is a systemic obstacle. But what a contrast. Here's Trump.
After 49 years, Israel and the United Arab Emirates will fully normalize their diplomatic relations. They will exchange embassies and ambassadors and begin cooperation across the board. This is a truly historic moment.
A landmark deal, peace deal, that brings Jews and Arabs together to change the Middle East for the better. Or as CNN might describe it, racist. So what was Joe up to?
Every single American should be wearing a mask when they're outside for the next 3 months at a minimum.
So while Trump ushers in a huge peace agreement, Joe regurgitates Trump's own stance as a phony mandate. Trump makes peace, Biden makes poopy. Meanwhile, the media is already circling the race and gender wagons. This is just their shtick to silence criticism by branding all forms of it racist. They trot it out whenever they can, especially when their candidate can't stop spewing nonsense.
Then we're going to get to work fixing the mess that President Trump and Vice President Pence have created, both at home and abroad, through 4 years of mismanagement and coddling of terrorists and thugs around the world.
What? Trump coddled terrorists? This from a guy who didn't want to kill Osama? Now talking about a guy who got ISIS, Soleimani, and al-Baghdadi? No wonder the media is floating the idea that Harris is ready to take over when Joe steps aside. Maybe they're setting the table for something, and it's not just strained peas.